下面有请斯坦福大学教育学院院长 Dan Schwartz. Now let's welcome the Dean of the Stanford Graduate School of Education, Dan Schwartz.
Hello, and thank you. So this is a very simple talk. There's a lot of people who are working on instruction, and my suggestion is you also pay attention to how people learn. It's that simple. But I'm going to try and prove it. So welcome back to school. I'm about to give you a lecture. So why do I start with this? Let's imagine, I think this is the way a lot of companies think about a student. The student is the ship, and what we're doing is we're putting on different skills and pieces of knowledge, and we're just piling that onto the child so they can carry more and more cargo as they go forward. So this is this is a better analogy for what a child's brain is doing. This is the inside, right? There's all these different thoughts and all these different ships, and they're all going different directions. And you really need to take this into account when you think about teaching, right? You can't just pay attention to the content that you're going to teach. You also need to pay attention to how they learn and what's going on in their heads. So I'm going to give you, I think, the one giant insight out of the science of learning, and that is learning is just not a single thing. Sometimes we say, did they learn? Did the test whether they learned? So there's a lot of different learning mechanisms in humans. We're spectacular learners. There's no animal that gets close to us. We're such good learners that we evolved the ability to teach because we need people to learn so much. And we even created the institution of education. And inside of us, there are all these different ways we learn. So for example, your immune system that allows you to resist diseases is a great learner, right? It learns to recognize all those different diseases. If you have a transplant of your bone marrow, your body forgets all the diseases. That's how you know it's learning. The way that we learn math is quite different than the way we learn language. Math has a lot of spatial components to it. Emotional responses, we learn by watching how other people respond. So if your child falls down, your young infant falls down, they're going to look at you to find out should they cry or laugh. And you're going to teach them what kind of emotional response they should have. So the place this shows up, right, is that if you're teaching different things, you need to address the different kinds of learning mechanisms that you need to teach. And so teaching works best when it understands the appetite of the learning mechanism that you're trying to engage. So I'm just going to give a sustained example here. So here's the most basic teaching move. What I do is I try and get the student to perform the behavior. I try and get them to say the word, or to get the correct answer, or to write down the right sentence, or to do the right dance move. And once they've made the right behavior, I then reinforce it. I say, good job, and I have them practice some more. So this should be familiar. This is the basic teaching move. I see it in almost all of the software that is being designed here. You're trying to get the student to do the right behavior, and then somehow you reward them and have them practice. Unfortunately, it's more complex than that. So let me give some examples where this fails. So here's an example of when doing the behavior isn't quite enough for learning. So it was a study, and the children were learning Chinese characters. And so there's a lot of Chinese characters. And in one condition, the draw condition, they saw the character in front of them, and their job was to draw it on a sheet of paper. And they did this a lot of times, right? It's a very standard approach. The other condition, they never drew the characters, they only looked at them. And then a few days later, they asked the children to draw the characters, to redraw them, to see had they learned them. So you wait and you see what they do. Make sense? So one condition, they're drawing it. The other condition, they're only looking at it. The surprising thing is that the condition that only looked led to much greater accuracy when they were drawing. So even though drawing seems like the most direct path, turns out it wasn't, that looking was more. And so despite having practiced the behavior, the draw condition was not as effective at helping the children learn. So you should be thinking, how is this possible, right? They're drawing characters. Isn't the best thing to have them draw characters? So the answer was that the key here isn't the motor movements. The key is learning to perceive. So the look-only condition, they use something called contrasting cases. So you probably know this from wine. You'll taste different wines side by side to help you notice what's special about each wine, what makes them distinctive. I'm not very good at wine. I look at it and I just say, oh, it tastes red, right? It's probably not specific enough. So what do? They take two different wines, have me sip each, and then I notice what makes them distinctive. So for the Chinese characters, the key learning here is figuring out what makes each character unique. So if you look at this character, this is really obvious to you what it is. To me, it is not. I don't know Chinese characters. I look at this and I'm not sure what's important about it. So if I see a contrast right next to it, it helps me notice what is the key, right? And I think it's those little lines that are sitting in there. So these contrasting cases help me see what's important. That way, when I recreate it, I'll know what I should include. So the mechanism for learning to see more precisely depends on contrasts. So let me give a quick example. Let's say you want students to learn polygons. The most typical approach to this is you show them lots of examples of polygons, right? The key to victory on this is you also show them examples of what's not a polygon, and then you get much better effects. But this is you look at almost all instruction, it only gives you the positive examples. It never gives you the contrast, which makes it very hard for you to figure out what's important. So for the most basic teaching move, it turns out that getting students to do the behavior may not be the best approach. So now let's look at the second part. Shall we reinforce the behavior? So reinforcement is a well-known theory out of behaviorism. Imagine I have a little chicken, and I want to teach that chicken to turn. What I do is the chicken's going to move around a little bit, and when it turns in the direction I want, I'm going to give it a reward. I'll give it some food. If it's a child, I might give them some stars or points. It goes back, it turns, I give it a reward, goes back, turns, I give it a reward, and then it turns to where I want it to be, and I give it a lot of rewards. I help it level up, so to speak. If I want it to go the other way, there it's starting again. If it turns that way, I punish it, right? I say wrong choice, bad, no points for you. Turns the other way, I give it some points. Or in the case of a chicken, I give it some food, right? It goes the wrong way, I punish it. Goes the right way, I reward it. Goes the wrong way, punish it. Goes the right way, I reward it. So this is very typical of a lot of instruction that we do. We have kids solve problems. If they get it right, they get praise, they get points, they level up. If they get it wrong, we're not so harsh with kids. We just sort of say, try again, wrong. So this kind of reinforcement is extremely powerful. Video games rely on this a tremendous amount. You get points, you get to level up. Gambling is really a great example of this. When you get it right, you get money. What could be better? If you're like me, frequent flyer points. You know, I will get on an airline and take a flight I don't want to take so I can get more frequent flyer points. That's why I'm here. Grades also work that way. So this kind of teaching is very good when you can't reason. If you can't use reason to convince someone, reward will work. It's a very basic mechanism. It works for animals, it works for humans. For my son, there was one time I spanked him, it's when he walked into the street. I wasn't going to reason with him, I was going to shape his behavior through reinforcement. So it's very powerful. When I became a professor, I didn't write enough, and I learned to reward myself. So every Friday night, I would sit and try and write for 2 hours, and then afterwards, whether I wrote anything or not, I would give myself a scotch and a steak. It's very clever. So now every Friday night, I just write because I expect to get the reward. So this reinforcement system is also dangerous. If you're inconsistent, it will make a child scared. They won't know what to do. So children of alcoholic parents who are very inconsistent, the children don't know which behaviors will get punished, and so they stop behaving altogether. Finally, this kind of mechanism that we're using in all our instruction, it's very, very specific. It doesn't generalize. So if I reward you for doing some particular behavior, you're probably not going to do that behavior in another situation. You're going to do it in that behavior. The best analogy for this is people who smoke, they decide to quit smoking. And so they've always smoked after dinner, and they stop smoking after dinner. And they've always smoked at the morning paper, and they stop smoking after the morning paper. And they think they've quit smoking until they go home to visit their parents. And suddenly that urge to smoke comes all the way back because they used to always smoke with their parents. So this reinforcement, it's very specific. You have to reinforce every single behavior you want. Okay, so reinforcing behavior, it sounds like a great thing, but it can backfire. And so if you don't know when to use it, it's not going to work so well. So here's a famous study on the hidden cost of reward. These were 4-year-old children, and they were in a preschool, and suddenly the teacher brought out felt markers, colored markers, and this is special, right? This is, if you're a little kid, this is really exciting. And so half the children were told that using the markers, they would get a really nice ribbon and a prize for using the markers to draw. And the other half of the kids weren't told anything, they just drew, right? So these markers are very motivating. Half the kids were told, if you draw with this, we're going to give you a reward, which is the ribbon, right? The other half of the kids, they just said, if you'd like to draw, please draw. Then a week later, what they did is there was free play. In a part of the room, there were markers. And the question was, how much time did the kids go over and play with the markers? So here's what you get. There was 180 minutes total of free play that day. If you were in the reward condition, you used the markers to draw about 15 minutes. If no one had ever given you a reward, you used the markers to draw for 30 minutes. So rewarding this behavior actually made it happen less. So how's that possible? It's because the children learned to draw so they could get the reward. And when you said, I'm not going to reward you for it, they stopped wanting to draw. Even though, had I never rewarded them, they really like drawing. So rewarding people for things is dangerous. In this particular case, telling people you'll get a reward for doing something brings down creativity. So the children who got the ribbon for the drawings were less creative than the children who were not given anything. This is kind of a general truth. There are studies where they have companies offer a reward for innovation. If you come up with a great innovation, we will pay you. And when they do that, the amount of innovation in the company goes down. The reason is, if there's a reward, you play it safe. You're careful. You stop being daring because you want that reward so much. The way to do this, it's better to create a culture of innovation rather than to reward people for being innovative. So, turns out getting students to do the behavior isn't always the best thing. Turns out reinforcing the behavior isn't the best thing. So it turns out learning is really complex, and just doing what you intuitively think is right may not work. On the other hand, sometimes getting people to do the behavior and rewarding them for these things are the right moves as well. So where does this leave us? Well, it leaves us where science usually leaves us, which is the answer is, it depends. Depending on what you're teaching, you have to learn something to figure out the right way to teach it. So this is kind of an unhappy story. It'd be a lot easier if I could just put containers on the big ship, but that's not the way it is. If you want to be effective, you have to learn how people learn. So just as an advertisement, I'm not selling any products. There's a very good book on this that you could use to help you. So thank you very much.
感谢 Mr. Dan Schwartz 的精彩演讲。Thank you for your insightful sharing, Mr. Dan Schwartz.